how were you introduced to gaming? How was I introduced to gaming? Right, so I was just telling at the beginning of the stream that when I was 5 years old, my mother took us, me and my sister and my brother, to my aunt's house, my uncle's house, and our cousins who are a little bit older than us, 5 years older than us, they had the NES. But my cousins were always more on the sports side of things, they didn't care much about video games or action figures. And me and my sister were all about that. My brother didn't care about that much either, He was never really a gamer. He's played some games in the past and enjoyed them passionately, but he has never been a real gamer, But an action figures guy, Me and my sister, we were playing with toys and video games all the time. So how I got into gaming was, pretty much with the NES. I went to my aunt's house, and they had the NES plugged in. And she had that cartridge with Mario Bros, Super Mario Brothers, and Duck Hunt. So that was the first thing we tried. That was my first video game I ever played. Mario freaking Brothers and Duck Hunt with the gun. She had the gun. And she also had Excite Bike, racing game with bikes, pretty cool. And Skate or Die. Skate or Die, that's one game that I didn't know it was bad. It was considered as a bad game back then. I loved it, but I kind of forced myself to love it. Yeah, more on that later. Maybe I'll make a video one day, games that I was forced to like. Because I didn't have anything else. I mean, if you guys grew up in similar situation like me, that back then, in the 90s, we only had a bunch of games. It's not like today where everybody's got a huge backlog. Everybody can emulate anything, we have a bunch of games, consoles. No, back in the day, we were stuck with only 3 freaking games for an entire month. Or a long periods of time, that's just it. Those are your 3 games, you're fucked. Eventually my mother gave in, and we were begging for an NES, and since my aunt didn't want the NES and my cousins didn't want it, they didn't care for it, she gave it to us. And that was awesome, so I was like, oh yeah, and my mom was happy because she didn't have to spend a single penny on video games. But she ended up doing it later, I grew up with the NES, everybody else had the NES and the Game Boy. So we were always lending each other cassettes, that's how I found out about a lot of games. My mom eventually gave in, and every now and then used to take us to this store where you could rent games, We did a lot of rentals, my siblings and I. And, I became a fan, It never went away. My mom was always expecting, I guess my mom was always expecting me to grow out of video games. My sister did. She still plays every now and then. Whenever we see each other, we play Crash Bash, International Superstar Soccer. Those two are our favorite games to play together. Crash Team Racing, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the Super Nintendo. But like I said, I think my mom was always expecting us to grow out of video games, and my sister kind of did. My brother definitely did. I never did. And she was always kind of resentful for that, She didn't like video games, But, it was just, yeah. And then, before you ask what was my first JRPG, that was Final Fantasy Legend 2. I didn't know what Final Fantasy was. I didn't know what an RPG was. I was in middle school, first year. And my friend had a Game Boy, I had a Game Boy, and he said, you gotta try this game, it's like something you've never seen before. I don't know what kind of game is this. It's not like, you don't go from left to right and shoot people or jump over platforms, or it's not Tetris. It's just, what is this, and I borrowed the game, and that was like, wow, it was a turn-based RPG, but I didn't know that back then, and I was blown away. And that's how I got into RPGs. Later, 5 years later, I got into Super Mario RPG. 3 years later, I got into Chrono Cross, and you know the rest. So that's how I got into gaming. That's my story, my nostalgia story.